in wrapping things up, we've had lunch, we've had coffee. My job is I want to sort of leave you a little bit inspired. I want to leave you a little bit provoked, and I want to leave you a little bit questioning. So bear with me, and the beauty is those of you who know me know that I'll do all three, and also those of you who don't know me, it's nice that you all know we're on the record, because I'm always on the record. So if you like what you hear I have to say, please repeat it and attribute it. If you don't like what I have to say, say that guy's nuts, and feel free to just, we have to engage at a higher level. And so I'm going to do all three things that I promise, and I attended the whole day. I didn't come here with a preset speech to give to you. I really wanted to absorb what was going on. I wear a bunch of different hats. Right now I'm a technology CEO. I'm in the same seat that Bill's in right now. Before that, a large big data analytics software company. Before that, management committee of two of America's biggest, cleanest power companies, Exelon and Constellation Energy. 8 years in the White House. So I've worn a bunch of different hats that all organize around what we're talking about here today. And so let me start at the top. And let me start at the top in a friendly, critical way, which is we've had a full day, we've danced around a lot of issues, but we didn't sustain where we need to be, and it was in everybody's heads, and it crept out of everybody's statements. And I think actually the person that best pushed it was the kickoff, actually, was Michael. The entire conversation that we heard today emphatically wasn't big enough. It was academically kind of big enough, but not emphatically big enough. We are talking about global scale transformation of infrastructure where it exists, and global scale introduction of new, massively important infrastructure where it doesn't exist. That's what we're talking about, for the benefit of human welfare and for the benefit of preservation and protection of the planet. Okay? And so, because I'm not an academic, I get to say, gee, this was very academic. But what importantly is because so much of innovation is inspiration and competition. And so as we sit here and think about the R&D agenda, Michael summed it up really well early, and we really didn't come back to it. We're doing three things. One is we're providing access to energy, and that's not an end in of itself. It's because energy enables so much human welfare. Okay, that's what this is about. It's about education, it's about health, it's about transportation, it's about community mobility, it's all the things, it's about public safety. It's all those things, and that's why I'm glad Michael led with it first. Michael led secondly with an equally important and equally scalable item, which is local environmental impact. So much of energy infrastructure has highly consequential negative impacts that actually sicken, hospitalize, and kill people. Okay, so we're trying to go after that. And most of the conversation today, in fact, all of it after Michael, was about climate change. Okay, but let's not forget energy in most of the world, including still in some really important parts of America, is about public health as well. Okay, and that's important because then when you marry it to climate change, which is Michael's third point, we can develop a coherent structure of where we're focused on R&D in terms of the importance of getting energy that comes without an emissions footprint. Energy that comes without a water pollution footprint. Okay? Energy that comes without any toxic footprint. All right? That's the bundle of benefits we can seek to achieve, and they can help actually drive the cost calculations of why it's worth doing. So I want to start, and then let's go to the next piece. Melanie, embedded in all Melanie's detailed slides, was the most important point, and it's this: follow the money. Follow the money. $750 billion next year invested in the electricity system. $750 billion next year invested in the transportation and fuel system, the rest of the energy system. That's a lot of money. And it will either point at cleaner energy systems, or it will develop less clean or unclean energy systems. The money is there, and it will be deployed because the demand is there, and energy will be consumed. So this is really about how do we look at this multi-trillion-dollar commitment that is coming, and it's real. It's not millions, it's not hundreds of millions, it's not billions, it's multi-trillion-dollar investment that's coming. How can we just orient it toward a much better outcome. Okay, that's what this is about. How do we do it efficiently? How do we do it effectively? And how do we do it in a way innovators can get behind? Which means everything we're talking about when we talk about R&D is these have to be investable processes. Investable processes, and that's hard for people to get their head around if you've never deployed capital. I have had the unfortunate privilege of deploying capital, and I've had the unfortunate privilege right now of trying to obtain capital. It's really hard in this space. Why? It's really hard because of the reason Steve Connaughton mentioned, which is it's capital intensive and it's highly inelastic. And I would add to that, Steve, and it has to meet 5 nines of reliability. Okay, whether it's power or cars or the performance of fuel stock. Okay, there's something about energy, it's a public good, and we expect the highest levels of performance, which means it's the and high levels of safety, which means it is a dramatically conservative set of sectors and infrastructure. You can't fix it later, okay? And so that makes it really hard to scale up, and it's a commodity sector, which means the margins are small. Margins are really small, so it's not this, okay? We're talking about big, big, big investments. And so, as we then Daniel gave a verse, if Daniel's still here, I loved his presentation. Daniel had this very interesting point, which is, and it's the important one, how do I plug my innovation most rapidly into somebody with a boatload of money who can integrate it and put it into the market? That's the missing link of the conversation, and I feel like I've been having it for 25 years. It's this link. And here's the challenge. We heard a lot in the last panel about, it came out more. We always talk about the valley of death. But when it comes to the energy system infrastructure, any innovator faces the dune of death. So you've gone across the valley, but then you face the dune of death, which is how do I take my $50 million exercise and raise $2 billion worth of project capital? Okay, now that for anybody in a startup, that's just crazy. Okay, and then the people that want to invest the $2 billion of project capital, they're like, well, you have to have built a complete project, and it has to run for 5 years, so I can do my engineering on the economics and the safety and the reliability and the performance of this thing. So come back to me after somebody else has taken all that big project capital risk. Okay, and that's what I loved in the last session. There's a form of capital that's missing, and it's still missing. It's still missing for this kind of a system, and it's missing globally. So for those of you who are out there, I saw some grad students. There's who invented 20-year net present value calculations for financial? The energy system is not net present value 20 years. It's a fiction, but our financial instruments are based upon a time frame that does not match the time frame of energy infrastructure. And so, as we get into then the international discussion, again, a little friendly criticism, I thought the discussion was kind of loose. I thought I'd get a boatload of international collaborations and partnerships, and instead what we got was the importance of engagement and coming up with standards and lots of private sector activity and billionaires investing money. Okay, that's great. Love it when billionaires invest money. That's good. But the issue is the intensity of the need for that was missing in that, but we heard it later. If China is fully carbonizing, even as they bring a lot of other innovations into space, but they're carbonizing, and as India carbonizes, and as Indonesia carbonizes, and as South Africa carbonizes, how are we going to deal with all that carbon? And I would have thought, I'm of the mode, and certainly ClearPath, my partners are there, if we are not putting tons of early stage work into every form of figuring out how to transform carbon, we're making a huge mistake because we have 70 years of invested capital stock coming our way that it'll be impossible to reverse. And so there's also a prioritization and an intensity to prioritization of the R&D budget. So oddly, here's a place to partner with President Trump. If there's anyone on earth that wants to put a lot of money to figuring out the carbon profile from coal, it's that guy. Okay? And he's right in that respect because we have to deal with that fundamental issue. At the other end of the spectrum, we have countries like France who were willing to invest in 30 years in developing a zero-emission electricity system. It exists. I don't need innovation if I want to build that. They did it in 30 years. It exists. Any country who's developing their energy system could do the France system if they so wanted. We could provide them a lot of advanced research and the like. And so we have to figure out that balance as well. And then, of course, we had as we talked then about these international engagements, so where are we doing R&D, co-R&D, in advancements of existing technology so they can be deployed in their advanced form in developing countries. That's really where I wanted to, my takeaway from that international collaboration piece. And that's where Mike Booth's point is good. So you get the billionaires partnering with the governments, getting these government pledges, but we really, again, I want to suggest to all of you, let's come away with understanding the 4 or 5 big ones where we have to really amp it up. Then as we get to rethinking energy innovation, lessons from other sectors, very interesting. Bill Brown, DIY, do it yourself. All right, that's where he came from. But my company, do it yourself. We want nothing from government other than faster decision making on permitting our projects. Then you had Tom, who did let's borrow from what others have done and then do it yourself. So I like that one. And then Danielle gave us in the pharma sector really long lead cycles, massively intensive government engagement. The need for interconnection within the government system, but delivering these really, really big outcomes and beneficial outcomes. But I would also assert once you get to that outcome, it's the inelasticity goes away. So it's massively inelastic, and then it's massively elastic, but energy systems aren't, right? And so it's a lot of effort to get the drug out, but once it's out, you can ubiquitously deploy it. And that's one of the challenges we face with the crossover there. Finally, speed and scale. So I'll come full circle on speed and scale. At the end of the day, the air pollution challenge and the climate change challenge is very simple from a R&D into policy perspective. And my expertise is political economy and policy. And so as we think about the R&D agenda here and abroad, it's a question of how far, how fast, and at what cost. And R&D, from my frame of reference, is how do I get the cost first lower than the technology I'm trying to beat? Because then I don't need policy. If it's cheaper, I get it immediately. Okay, so that's test 1 of R&D. And I put as much money into that R&D as I could because its prospect of ubiquitous scalability is highest. And by the way, we don't do that. In our R&D agenda, in Europe's, in the ones in Asia, we don't prioritize money to the most profitably scalable outcomes. Okay, we don't do that the way we should. In some places, yes, but not intentionally. Then the second piece is how do I lower the cost of the additional features that makes the technology clean? All right, and that's important because I'm trying to get below a benefit cost threshold that could support regulation. Okay? And then anything that's coming in at a cost where I can't see the curve coming down, I can't figure out how to get, I put that as third priority. And by the way, Ellen did a great job of showing us how those curves work. We know what they are. It's funny, they all tend to be on this 20 to 30 year horizon. So we know how that works now, but so we can apply a methodology to new technologies to say, can we see the pattern recognition there? But I would submit to you that how far, how fast, and what cost is really interesting in our context for R&D because we know how far in air pollution in America, it's called the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. And actually, we know the places that don't meet them yet. And we know how big the markets are, we know what the health impacts are, and I can do a cost benefit, good old-fashioned Ronald Reagan cost benefit, to deliver, to know the kinds of technologies I now need to deliver that final bit I need for public health. And then on carbon, we actually know. George Bush, believe it or not, joined the G7. At the time, it was the G8, in understanding that America needs 80% emission reductions by 2050. Articulated goal of the G8. Barack Obama got the same thing out of the G7 when Russia was kicked out. And then that showed up in Paris. So oddly, there's this global consensus that the number is about, in the developed countries, about 80% by 2050. But an 80% by 2050 aspiration is not investable. Okay, and I've been an investor, I've raised money, I've been a policymaker. A goal of 80% by 2050 is not investable. And how do we know that? Because people aren't investing at that rate. They don't believe it. What they believe in America is the sum of the RPSs, the sum of what's required for national ambient air quality standards, the sum of the energy efficiency standards, and the sum of the CAFE standards. That's what the investment community believes. Okay, and so the pie to invest against is already defined in America in a series of mandates. And if you reverse engineer all the mandates, there's 100 of them right now in America, and you look at where capital's flowing in R&D and in deployment, it perfectly aligns. In fact, I'd love to see U of C do a study that brings that in, and I know it casually empirically, but they can prove it. The market's an amazing respondent to the exact signal that it's given. Okay, and so what's happening is the market's trying to find ways to meet CAFE cheaper, meet the lighting standard cheaper, meet the NACS cheaper, but they're working against the number that was given to them by the regulators and no more. Okay, and so how do we align the R&D to deliver those mandates at a lower cost? But then how can we imagine what 2050 looks like? And there, I need to know what my willingness to pay is. Now, I can call that a tax. I can call that an incentive. I can call that a cost-benefit analysis. I can call that a cost control. I can call it lots of things, and we all do. But at the end of the day, it's my number. As a matter of environmental policy and benefit cost analysis, what's my willingness to pay to avoid a certain harm? Where are the benefits going to exceed the cost of achieving those benefits? And so we actually know what that number is too. I mean, oddly, George Bush's regulatory number was around $50 a ton, and Barack Obama's number, as it happens, was around $50 a ton, and there's sensitivity, and we'll go forward with that. And the Republican Congress in the 45Q legislation just explicitly adopted $50 a ton. Now, $50 a ton in a 5-year regulatory program, not terribly interesting. But if you're starting at $50 a ton, and I'm looking out to 2050, I have a multi-trillion-dollar market signal to innovators that come roaring into the labs and come roaring into DOE and into the Department of Agriculture and in the Department of Transportation saying, let's partner up so we can affect the curve on $50 a ton times 30 years. Okay, now that's a market signal. That's a market signal. And so my parting comment to all of you as I look at the sum of today is we need to match and with clarity get political commitment on this objective, and then it'll be amazing how quickly the R&D fills in where it needs to go, and how the demand will go actually from subsidies. If I've got a real understanding of where my air pollution objective is and my climate objective is, how the subsidies will actually wither away and move into R&D. Okay, and that's sort of my personal objective. I'd much rather invert the curve from tens of billions of dollars going into subsidies of existing technologies and millions going into advanced technologies. I'd rather flip that curve and not need a lot of subsidy for deployment and put a lot more of that money in solving the real technical challenges now, that by the time I get to 2030 and 2040, when I'm trying to hit that 80% number, the technologies are there. They're ready to deploy and they're ready to put out into the market because they've tested and proven by people who know what they're doing. So that's what I'll leave you with. It's been a great session, really inspiring. Love all the different pieces of work we heard about today, and let's scale it up. Let's bring intensity, let's bring commitment and some clarity to the discussion. So thank you.